I normally don't like sweat that much.
Yeah.
Like we were thirsty for our water bottle.
Dude, I'm jealous.
I was so bummed out. I was like, Muscle Man's not even here.
I'll try to make sure to get it up next week.
But definitely try the workout and let me know. Like, please actually try it with Alex. It's a good workout.
Okay.
It's really, really good. I'll send it to you. All right. Thank you for showing up, the homies, the true ones. All right, so this, I didn't realize, so the last Chalk Talk, a lot of this stuff shouldn't have been on there because it should have been reserved for this one. So this one's going to be a little bit shorter just because I'm going to kind of go through it a little bit faster just because it's already stuff we had covered from the last one. Because I really want to spend a little bit more time on the pictures. And the reason we have pictures is because I want you guys to give feedback on what people should be doing with the correct form and things like that. It's going to really show you how to have proper form when you actually see it yourselves. So we're going over cell shape and control lines. Does this work? Oh, I'm done. All right, so yeah, so our overview is just what are control lines, cell shapes, how to use them correctly, what your cell shapes should look like when you're sailing. Then we're going to look at pictures, and then I'm going to give my final advice. I know that you have the regatta this weekend. Does anyone else, you have? Yes, so it's very important. Jay. All right, so control lines. So we use them to really adjust the shape of our sail, and this really, really impacts how your boat speed a lot. So, you know, if your bang is too tight, it's going to really cut off the flow on the top of your sail. If you don't have enough outhaul, you're going to be moving a little bit slower compared to other boats. So really the teams that use their control lines a lot on the race course are the ones that typically do a lot better and perform a lot better. They're always making sure their boat is moving faster compared to everyone else. So as you guys can see, there's some there. So we do have our outhaul. You guys know what the outhaul does? Pulls the sail out. You can control that. You control the belly of the depth of the sail. Then we have downhaul, Cunningham. So those are two words that are used. They mean the same thing. You'll hear them from different people, like from a coach or whatnot. Downhaul and Cunningham mean the exact same thing. It pulls on the tension of the luff, so you can control that. Then we have the bang. You guys know that because in the FJs you have to sit backwards, so that doesn't like give you line burn on your face. It does happen. And then rig tension. Do you guys know what rig tension means?
You've all done it.
You guys do it every practice. Yes. So you use the jib to really put on the rig tension. That is super, super critical. That could really, really affect your boat speed, especially when your control lines aren't really doing anything or helping you. That's how you know rig tension is actually a problem and you can actually fix that. And then you have your jib cars. So the crew, you guys know you can adjust the shape of your jib sail using the cars. Super duper important in really, really light air, and then also very important in very heavy winds, like 20 knots or above. And like I said, you should always be adjusting these on the race course all the time. When I'm racing with Dylan, I'm like, okay, I feel really slow. I'm probably going to ease off the bang, or I'm going to put a little bit more downhaul because I think this will really help the sail, and we'll end up moving faster or we'll end up slower. You just have to constantly experiment. It's okay to slow down for a second. That just means you're testing out what the boat is. And the reason why you want to experiment is because the age of the sail is going to matter, the age of the boat's going to matter, and your weight, the total weight combined in the boat is also going to really affect the sail shape as well. So like I said, if your control lines are like too tight, let's say in light wind, you're going to be very, very slow because you're flattening your sail and you're not letting the sail breathe to actually move fast. And then upwind, you're going to have different settings for upwind and then drastically different settings downwind. So it's very important that you at least touch your control lines twice, at the bare minimum twice. So as you guys can see here, we have our little graph here. So here we have the wind strength and then our control tension. So this is a really good outline of how to figure out how much tension or how much you should use of each control line for different wind conditions. So as you can see in light, everything's kind of loose. We want a looser rig to let the sails breathe, to really create that deeper belly to allow more wind to flow across the sail. Versus like survival, this is a little weird, so don't really look at that area. That's like 25 knots. The only time this really applies is like if you're in the 420. FJs really, really struggle to sail in anything above 20 knots. They just physically start breaking. So the only time survival would be relevant is if you're sailing in the 420s, just because they're built for that kind of wind conditions. FJs, really, they kind of max out at 20 knots. That's including the puffs. So otherwise, it really sucks. They're just too light, they're too narrow to really handle that kind of strain from the wind. So for our outhaul, like I said, it controls the foot of the sail. Do you guys know what the foot is? I'll also draw the foot. So we have our main sail. Oh, that's awful. This is very exaggerated just so you guys can see it a little bit better. So right here we have the luff. Oh my god. I'm just writing. We have the luff here, the foot, and we have the leech. So I'm going to use these terms a lot, so it's really good to kind of memorize what these are. When you're with a very experienced skipper, they'll talk about a lot of these things. With Dylan and I, we talk about the leech a lot. It's very important for our downwinds. And then for upwinds, it's really important that we also talk about the foot. So try to remember those three terms is very important. So it controls the foot of the sail. That's also really controlling the center of the sail, that belly portion, to really maximize the power out of your sail. And then in light air, we want it, ease in light air, and then in heavy wind, you really want to cinch it. The reason why we want to cinch it in heavy winds is because you want a wall. If you have a wall, you're not powering up your sail, and the wind's going across your sail a little bit faster, so you're not like heeling as much and not struggling to hike. That's why we really want to crank that in heavy wind. Light wind, you want to ease it out, let the sail breathe. The wind is not moving as fast, so you want to catch as much of it into your sail. The vane. So the vane is very important for both skipper and crew, and there has to be a lot of communication that goes in between the vane, because in the newer boats, I think it's the Z420, where the vane goes to the skipper, which is why they built the new 420s that way. So for the FJs, there has to be a lot of communication, because the vane is really going to affect the weather helm for the skipper and the top of the main sail. So the really good way to think about it is the vane controls the top half of the main sail, and the main sheet controls the bottom half of the main sail. Both portions are very important. So like I just said, and then heavy wind, you really want to crank the vane all the way in. It's going to help the skipper hold the mainsail inside the boat. Heavy wind, or in just a medium wind as well, you don't want the end of that boom past the corner of the boat. Otherwise, you're not really giving the boat as much speed that it actually could have.
So just to add on, the bang specifically is it's controlling the upper half of the main, but even more specifically, it's controlling the top batten. So changing the bang is basically changing how the top batten is positioned for the boat. So when you really tighten the bang, then you're pulling the top batten down and opening up the leech.
Right here.
So it's using your bang as a way to depower your sail.
Mm-hmm. All right, so for our downhaul, I'm just going to call it downhaul. I'm just used to calling it downhaul because it's very similar to outhaul as well. Controls the luff of the sails. So that's why sometimes what Mitchell would used to do during practices is when I would be giving chalk talks, he would go around and mess up everyone's control lines, like over tighten someone's vane or like loosen someone's outhaul tremendously, because that tells us, and if you guys go out on the water and we see like really ugly sail shape, that just tells us you're not actually paying attention to your control lines. And that we do that randomly. So that means you got to make sure you look at them. You know, if you're too tight or too loose, you're probably going to be the slowest person on the race course. So it's very important you look at those. And heavy wind, you also want to tighten it. You want to really create that wall. So you want to cinch everything. This is a really, I've heard multiple different things. So you know how we have this little loop here at the clew of the sail? So this is called the clew, this little corner. And over here, this is, oh, I lied. This is the tack, right? Yeah, this is the tack. This is the tack. This is the clew. So we're using more fancy terms now. You know how we have this like little, what is it, grommet or something?
What
the little hole here that you would put the
grommet.
outhaul through. And then you have your slug here that goes into the track for the mast. It's actually better to go over the slug versus the grommet itself. It's going to actually provide more tension and actually give better sail shape. Florida Tech does this a lot. That's one of the schools I know that actually does that. When you go through the grommet, it doesn't really pull down the sail as much as you would like. Sometimes you can crank the downhaul through the grommet, but it's actually not going to really help change the sail. You pull through the slug, it's actually going to pull the corner of that sail a lot more, and you'll have better control. So try this. I want you guys to get into the habit of putting it over the slug rather than through the grommet. And want you guys to feel how the sail feels. The skippers are going to feel it a little bit more just because they're the ones controlling the mainsail, but try to get into that really good habit. If your sail doesn't have a slug, just use the grommet. That also just depends on the school. But if the school does have a little slug, go over the slug instead of the grommet.
In light and heavy one?
Yes. And then jib cars. When we were moving boats around, I was very confused why there was jib cars everywhere. It was kind of ridiculous. The standard setting is 3 holes showing from the back. That is the standard setting for almost any wind condition. Once we get into light wind, that is when you will move it. This is like less than, 3 knots. You'll have 4 holes showing. That's to create a deeper belly in the jib. If it's heavy wind, I will explain what your jib car setting should be in heavy wind. But the standard setting should always be 3 holes. So if you get into a boat at practice, move the jib cars. Don't let them sit there. It's really going to affect your boat speed a lot, especially because the FJs, the gas pedal is the jib, not the main. These aren't 420s. The 420s are reversed. So make sure your jib car setting is correct. That's how you're going to get a lot of boat speed and good point out of it as well. And then main sheet and jib, this is a problem I still actually have. You guys should be sheeting at the same time. So you know how you can hear the little ratchets every time you guys sheet in and stuff? When you guys like do accelerations or sheeting or easing, they should be going at the same time. That's how you really maximize it and transition smoothly so you're not disturbing the slot or like flow of the sail or flow of the wind over the sails. You want to do those at the same time. It's really hard to kind of nail that down unless you're sailing with the same person every single time and kind of get into your groove. But just try to remind, so skippers, try to remind your crew, because you're going to be the one easing your mainsail quite a bit. In crew, I always be very verbal, especially when I'm hiking or anything. I'm like, oh, I'm easing, oh, I'm trimming, I'm easing or I'm trimming. Because if you ease out, you're going to obviously slow the boat down. If you're trimming, it's going to allow your skipper to point higher. So it's very, very important you see that every single time. Yeah, it's going to sound redundant, but it's actually super important for the skipper to make sure they know what's happening. Because if you're easing, you're going upwind, they're going to think, oh, maybe it's a wind shift, I need to head down, when that's actually not the case. So you got to be very, very verbal, because that's actually going to affect the distance, the amount of distance you're sailing, and how much power that you have in the boat. And then rig tension, like I said. So in heavy wind, you want to put a lot of rig tension. You don't want to put too much, otherwise it's going to damage the bottom of the boat. It's only like a few layers of fiberglass, you don't want to damage it. But like, let's say Zek, so Zek, how much do you weigh?
Like 175.
Okay, so for rig tension, you probably want to put that amount of weight on the forestay to crank the rig back, so it's a lot tighter. In light wind, let's say we could put like 120 pounds, something like that. You don't want your boom sagging low, because if you don't put enough rig tension, your boom is going to be really low, and if you go for a tack, your skipper's going to get hit in the head because it's actually too low. This has happened to me. Because at that point, you get into muscle memory, you know how much to duck, you kind of have like boom awareness. If it's too low, your skipper's going to get hit in the head, and that just really sucks. So even in light wind, you don't want too much rig tension, but enough so that your skipper can clear the boom when they do their roll tacks.
So if it's a really heavy wind day, should I have somebody else?
Yes, yeah. And heavy wind, sometimes I'll like, hey Zek, can you put tension on my forestay, because I can't put enough. So always find a heavier person to do it. Light wind, anyone can put that rig tension on for themselves. And this is also a good thing. Rig tension is also going to depend on the waves. I can't remember off the top of my head, but in waves, if it's like, USF, you kind of want a looser rig because you want the rig to kind of move with the waves. Otherwise, you're going to be bow slamming. It's really flat. You can get away with a little bit more tension. So like Rollins, yeah, it's like 5 knots, but you want to put a little bit more rig tension to go for point.
So that slightly looser tension is a very narrow
fine
line. Because I've seen people who basically didn't put any rig tension on because it was really heavy chop, and I saw their boom and mast coming towards each other, basically.
And then you just dump wind.
Yeah, that's super slow. So you want the whole rig to stay as one piece and rock back and forth. So for those of you that helped us put all of the masts back in, you saw that the mast has a cutout that sits on a bolt, and so you want that cutout to just be rocking from one end to the other through the waves. And so you want the rest, everything, all your sails and everything else needs to be just one solid piece rocking with the mast, rather than collapsing.
And another good thing too is if you're unsure how strong the puffs are, you want to rig to the puffs, not necessarily the wind conditions. Because the puffs, that's how you're going to get ahead of someone, right? You want to use gain, get all your ups in the puffs. So that's why, like if it's, let's say at practice it's like 10 knots, but the gusts are 15, I'm going to probably put a little bit more rig tension for the gust for that 15 knots versus the 10 knots. And a good rule of thumb, if you've been to a venue and you're unsure what the wind conditions are like, put more rig tension than you think. It's a lot easier to loosen it up versus to add more. It's almost impossible to add more rig tension once you're out on the water because you don't have like a force to actually help you pull it in. It's really, really difficult. So always put a little bit more than you think. It's a lot easier to ease the jib power than to crank it back in. It's a good rule of thumb. Right, so for upwind sailing, these are kind of generalizations. It's obviously going to depend on the sea state, like if there's chop, what shifts, puffs, and things like that. So these are just really good generalizations. Alcohol should always be tight enough to where you can have a fist width. So here's the boom, my fist width, and then here's the foot of the sail. That's how much you want it almost at all times unless it's heavy wind. So your fist width. No more, no less, unless it's heavy wind. Jib cars always should be showing 3 holes. That's the standard for almost all wind conditions. Vane should be snugged. You don't want to crank it down too much, otherwise you're going to close out the leech. You're not going to have good sail flow over your mainsail. So just have it snugged. You know how when you get in the boats, generally like loose, just snug it up a little bit. You could put a little bit of tension, just have it snug so it's not dangling around. That's going to really help the top batten kind of flow a little bit better as well. And sometimes we actually have tailtails. I think all the Kings Point sails have them. This is going to be very important later on. There's one telltale here, and I believe another one here. So those are also going to be very important for the skippers themselves. Crew, you have your own set of jib telltales, very important as well. Rig tension, like I just said, you want it not too loose, but you want it tight enough so that you can power up when you do your roll tacks. If your rig's too loose, it's going to just like jingle around. You're not going to be able to get that power. Every roll tack and every jibe should kind of be like a speed boost, like at a Mario Kart. It should really be a boost every single time. If you slow down, that probably means you didn't throw your ass hard enough to roll the boat, or your rig is not tight enough to where you can actually power up every single time. Wake placement, this is very important for crew. Very light wind, so like if Brian's my skipper, I sometimes sit in a tiny ball lure so that he can still sit staying up. The reason why I want that is so that he can still see all the way around behind him without being blocked off by like the jib or anything else like that.
And in super light wind, the skipper should be sitting like on the windward bench of the centerboard, kind of like tuck your legs up, and you're basically like squatting on the bench.
Yeah,
almost.
So what Mitchell does is he kind of does this with his leg.
Yeah.
He kind of folds like this and sits in like this.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable, but when you move your weight forward in the boat, you're gonna move a lot faster.
It's like you're sitting to be more aerodynamic.
Yeah, essentially. Like Mitchell will sit really low like this, kind of tucked in, and he's like 250 pounds. Like he's gonna have to do it.
Yeah.
He just sits like this and he just holds the tiller like this. It sucks, but like you're gonna be a little bit more aerodynamic. Your weights move forward. The mainsail's gonna come up a little bit higher because your transom's not as like in the water as much. You're gonna move a lot faster. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but those are the teams that are gonna move a lot faster, especially at venues like Rollins with very light wind. So, crew, you should never ever be sitting still. You're always moving. If you don't have bruises, if your legs aren't exhausted, then you're not sailing right. You gotta always be moving. Your main job is to make sure the boat is flat. Flat is fast. Light wind, you wanna be in that corner. Yeah, it's gonna suck, but you wanna be like a ball and hold that jib sheet like this. It sucks, but that's the fastest way you're gonna get around the course. Because if you don't, you're gonna be sitting out there even longer and take even longer to get around the course. Yep, so like I said, move forward in the boat. You don't want your transom dragging because you have the suction. Suction's gonna be a problem, and that's gonna make you a lot slower, right? So when we sit forward in the boat, you have less surface area.
With transom?
The transom is the back part of the boat. So here's a little boat. There's our mast. So this
Okay.
area, transom. And then we'll call this area bow. Because you know the aft part of the boat is a little bit wider than the top part. So that they have a lot more surface here, and that's going to be a lot more suction that's happening. So you want to reduce that to move a little bit faster. For skippers, very important for light wind. Actually, I'm not a skipper, so this is a little bit hard for me to teach. If you want to go over this, Brian.
Yeah. So, when you're a skipper, in light medium air, it's super easy to start pinching and not realize it. So that's where the slight amount of positive helm comes. So you're pulling the helm a little bit towards you, kind of keeping your bow away from the wind a little bit, just to make sure that you're not pinching, because you're already going slower, and so that slight difference in speed can be really hard to tell, but makes a huge difference on the course compared to everyone else. So then continuing, you don't want to force the bow up. You just want to have the jib eased slightly or heel to leeward more by telling the crew to heel to leeward. For those of you that don't know, when you heel the boat to leeward, it causes the boat to round towards the wind. When you heel the boat to windward, it causes it to round away from the wind. It's a really good way to, if you know your boat really well and know how to handle the heel, and you know that you are you're just gonna make the mark, you can kind of get away with pinching it by as you're getting closer to the mark, you just heel to leeward and round up, and you go tighter than you want for your entrance, but you don't have to short tack. It makes a huge difference. So rather than just trying to pinch by steering, which is really slow in light and medium wind, you can let the boat pinch by heeling. So you really need to match the rudder angle with the angle of the centerboard when you're jibing. It makes a huge difference to have smooth flow over your blades when you're going slow. When you're going fast, It really, there's not a huge difference in terms of like minor turbulence when you're going through your maneuvers. When you're going slower, it is a huge difference. And it's really just one of those things that comes with practice of feeling where the rudder is flowing the best. And then you want to steer for a height in all but the lightest air. And even then, sail neutral in the groove, don't foot. Do you guys know what the groove is? So the groove is the fastest way that you're going to be sailing upwind. It's right on close hauled, and so it's a little bit wider than the boat's width on close hauled, and so you want to be sailing a little bit more towards the windward side of the groove in everything but super light air. And in super light air, you're going to be sailing pretty much central in the groove. In this light to medium air, you do not want to be footing, so you don't want to be sailing, closer to a close reach rather than close hauled.
So the best way to think of,
Could you explain the third point again?
The rudder angle.
Yeah.
So I'll explain what a driving centerboard. So FJs have a driving centerboard. The centerboard can like move in its slot a little bit.
Yeah, so you can kind of think of it as like this, the centerboard is, so normally we think of the centerboard as just coming like straight down in the boat. So there's the boat, the centerboard's coming straight down. The jibing centerboard, it comes down and is actually at a slight angle. So then when you jibe onto the other tack, the centerboard actually pivots in its trunk, so that it's rather than it being a perfect blade flowing through the water, it's a control surface like on an airplane wing. And so that's the jibing centerboard is going to be pivoting as you're going downwind from tack to tack.
So does that like move your rudder more gently?
So
Yeah, that's a good way
Yeah.
to do it. That's why I tell people don't force your rudder over when you guys go for tacks, because then you stall your rudder out, and then your centerboard's gonna slow you down. So it kind of does like a weird like wheelie at the same time, and then you just stall it out. So that's why I tell you guys move slower, so it's matching the same speed as the centerboard's moving within the trunk to really get a faster movement out of it, and so that you don't understeer or oversteer, and you actually get to properly power up the boat as well. Because if you guys move it over too fast, you're not matching that, and you're gonna lose a lot of speed. It's kind of like it's like slamming the brakes. That's a good way to put it. You're slamming the brakes instead of actually accelerating with it. So that's why you guys move slower. That's why I say when you slow down on the tack, you actually gain a lot more speed out of it. So always slow it down. And with the drives, you guys force it over really fast, you stall it out, and then you have two different forces going two different directions. That's why it stalls, and that's why you will end up death rolling or lose almost all your speed at the same time.
Thank you, that makes a lot more sense.
all right, so for sail trim, it is really easy to over trim in light air.
Dylan and Mitchell do this a lot too.
FJs and 420s are like most boats in that you can over trim, and then there's some more performance boats like lasers. Lasers, there's no such thing as over trimming in light air. You cannot be over trimmed until it's blowing like 18 knots. But in FJs, you just basically like suffocate the sail in light air by having it trimmed in too tight. So you need to ease a lot more than you think, especially for the jib, but for both the main and the jib.
And so, let's say you have your main sail here. This is kind of at an angle. And then we have our jib here. This is really weird looking because we're looking from the back, like this is the transom here. If you have this oversheeted, you close out this little slot area, and then Bernoulli's like law, or I can't remember what it is. Principle. You don't have that really good flow, and you're not going to move as fast because you're suffocating the sail. You're not letting it breathe, and you're getting rid of this belly area. That's the most important part. So if you ease it out, you increase the slot, and then you have better flow for the main. Because the jib, they overlap, right? So it's going to affect, the jib is going to affect the flow over the backside of this main. So it's very important that you don't over trim that. The main, if you close it out, it's going to look kind of like this, and then you have just really bad flow over the main sail. That's what's going to kill it.
So in most conditions, you know, we always say a flappy sail is an unhappy sail. You don't want that bubble in the front of your main. In light air, you want that bubble in the front of your main because that's telling you that your slot is the right gap. Because that's showing that there is correct flow coming through. You don't want it flapping, you want it filled. So just a slight bubble coming off of the luff, filled, means that the gap between your sails are correct and you have correct trim.
So it'll look something like this. You'll see this will be coming towards you and the rest of the sail's full this way.
Only in light air. Once you're above like 6 knots, it means that you're not trimmed properly. It's only in these really light conditions.
And sailing in light wind is tremendously more difficult than sailing in heavy wind. Heavy wind, you don't need proper technique, you're just trying to survive. Light wind is when all the technique matters because every little bit of sail shape is really what's gonna help you move faster around the course. That's why sailing in light wind is so much more difficult, and that's why people hate it, because it's hard. If you don't have everything nailed down to the smallest detail, it's just gonna be miserable.
All right, so you want to trim slowly to hear the individual ratchets from both the jib and the main.
So you'll hear that click, click, click.
Yeah, it should be rhythmic rather than, you know, just a ripping sound from the ratchet as you sheet in. The leech will be tighter than you think for the main. Ventilate slightly to maintain speed a couple times per minute, so that's ease and kind of squeeze towards the wind a little bit to force the air off of the leech.
So when you guys squeeze and ease, this leech is gonna get tighter and then you're gonna loosen it.
Yeah.
So you wanna make sure you're controlling. That's why the telltales are very important to see that. So you wanna have them flying and then stalled a little bit.
So stall the top telltale for point and get it flying for speed.
So you just want the top one hanging?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're like, say you're trying to hit the ley line as you're going upwind, you're gonna, so you're really trying to point to the mark. You don't care about how fast you're going as long as you're pointing to it. Then you want to stall the top telltale, but say you overshoot your ley line, and so you just want to get to the mark as fast as you can. You want it flying because you want to be going as quick as possible.
So that's how you also know if you're going for point or power as well. Point, you have it flying. Power is when you stall it.
Other way around.
Oh, is it? Yeah, sorry, my bad, it's the other way around. Here. So, this kind of spilled in from last week. The only every time we broad reach at venues, if it's like less than 3 knots, you're presenting more, you want that angle, you're gonna have better BMG, better slot, everything like that. It's really rare, you guys probably won't ever really be broad reaching at any venue unless it's Rollins, otherwise always go wing on wing. And when you do have to broad reach, make sure the main is not sitting on the shroud, you're just letting the wind just move over the mainsail and you're not actually moving at all. You want it off the shroud. It's also really bad for the main as well if it's resting on the shroud. It kind of cuts into the mainsail. So have it slightly off and you want to be controlling it as well. Up, down in the puffs, up in the luffs. You guys know what that means. So if you have a puff, it allows you to drive farther down. So let's say I'm at a broad reach, right? So you guys are the wind, I'm at a broad reach. If you guys have a big puff, I'm gonna head a little bit down so I can sail less distance because I'm moving a lot faster. It's just conservation of energy. If there's a big luff coming, I'm gonna head up a little bit to present more surface area to the wind to maintain that same speed. So up in the luffs, down in the puffs. It's a lot of back and forth. And crew, if you feel a lot of pressure in your jib, what I tell Dylan, like, Dylan, I got a lot of pressure, head down. So we can maintain that speed and sail less distance and get faster to the mark. Or I'm like, Dylan, I'm losing a lot of pressure, like, can you head up a bit? I need to keep the jib filled. He's gonna head up just a little bit, and it should be no more than 3 to 5 degrees that you're moving. Any more than that, you're gonna be losing wind and speed off your mainsails.
Should you move like at the time the gust hits you or before when you see it coming?
At the same time, it's gonna be slow transitions, very slow. You wanna keep it nice and smooth. If you do anything too fast or sharply, you're dumping power and energy off your boat right away. It's more than you think. Another good thing is ease the outhaul. This is for wing on wing as well. Ease the outhaul probably like 2 centimeters. It's gonna make a drastic difference in your speed as well. In crew, when you're broad reaching, you actually have to hang off the side of the boat. You want that heel, really move that mainsail a little bit higher, and allows your crew, your skipper to sit up and actually look behind for puffs. You're facing forward, watching those telltales, making sure they're flying straight back. So your skipper needs to be able to sit up and look behind him. If he's inside the boat, it's going to be much harder for him to tell you what's happening. Dylan, I want him to be able to sit up. He's gonna say, hey, a big puff coming, get ready to hold that jib, because I'm only using one arm. That's a lot of power that I'm holding in one arm. So I want to be prepared and anticipate what's gonna happen. Yep, so wing on wing, you'll generally do this at almost any venue, even if it's like 20 knots out. The only time I've ever broad reach is like when it was 30 knots and I was just too scared. Like literally, I was just like too scared. I was like, that, I'm probably gonna death roll. So if it's like 30 knots, it's okay to broad reach. It's absolutely okay, because when you're wing on wing and you like start to, you know, teeter-totter, you can death roll and probably like faster than you can blink. So that's the only time I've ever broad reach if it's not light wind. And it's perfectly okay, it's a lot safer. You'd rather be safe than end up capsized in the water, because once you capsize in 30 knots, it's really hard to right that boat. That's usually means you're done with the race. It just takes you way too long to get back in the boat. It's really hard to control, so it's okay to just broad reach. Like I said, suction and drag will be a problem. This kind of goes in for the wing on wing that I just talked about 2 weeks ago. Move up in the boat, you really want that heel. What are the 4 reasons that we want to be healing? Zach, I know you know one of them.
Getting your mainsail higher.
Mm-hmm.
To get the least amount of certain boat in the water.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, you want to volunteer and answer? No. When we heel over, we let gravity do the work for the jib, so it stays more full. You don't have to do as much work as to hold it out. The gravity's going to do its job to make sure it's nice and full. And another reason why we have heel as well, so it allows us to pull up the centerboard as well. Y'all be slacking, bro. What do you guys do on the race course? You don't do any of this?
No, we put this on
We
the
do
board.
that.
I'll find out in like 5 days.
Yeah, so when you go wing on wing 2, you really want to loosen the bang. When you do that, you're gonna see your boom pop up, and it allows the mainsail to be even higher in the air. Very important that you control the bang. And when you do wing on wing jives, you snug it a little bit more to power up the boat for the jive. It's gonna be like a speed boost in Mario. When you finish the jive, you take off the bang again to let the mainsail pop back up. Very, very important that you do that. Don't ever forget about the bang. That's how you can get speed boost every time you need a jive, because half the time when you do wing-to-wing jives on a race course, it's a gamble. It's literally a gamble. If you don't time it right correctly, you're gonna either lose a lot of speed or maintain your speed. That's usually what it is. Yeah, and another reason why we snug the bang a bit is so that the top bang will pop over. Nothing sucks more balls than having your bang still curved like this. It just destroys the flow of your mainsail. It literally sucks a lot. So when you snug up that bang, it brings it down a bit, tightens it, so when you do jive, it pops to the other side. Do you guys kind of understand what I'm saying? So it's like curved. You want it to pop to the other side. If it stays curved towards you, you lose so much boat speed, and it's bad for the top half of that sail. Snug it so that bang can pop over. Yep, board up. And always board down when you jive. One time I forgot to put the board down, we death rolled. It just sucked. We came last in that race. So never forget to snug the bang and put the centerboard down. How fast should the centerboard be put down?
Smooth, but quick.
Why smooth?
Because you don't want to like throw the brake on.
Yes.
Brakes.
Slamming the centerboard down is like putting the brakes on. You create bubbles and cavitation. It's gonna slow the boat all of a sudden. You're creating bubbles and it's like putting air brakes on. So put it down smoothly and slowly. If you also force it down, you might death roll as well, because that's a subtle movement and you lose boat speed as well. So upwind and medium wind, there's really not too much technique, because you're really focused on keeping the boat flat. That is probably the most important thing in heavy wind, is flat is fast. If you're not flat, what usually happens, I'm running out of board space, man. What generally happens in heavy wind, if you're heeling too much, so let's say this is our boat like this. if you're heeling too much like this, what's gonna happen is the wind's gonna catch to the underside of the boat, and it's gonna force you to drift. So let's say you're like fetching the mark here, right, and you're right here. If you're heeling too much, what's gonna happen is you're gonna move this way away from the mark versus actually fetching the mark. So that's why you wanna be flat. When you're flat as well, you power up the sail a lot more, create more power because you're flattening the boat, putting more force onto the main sail, so you're gonna move a lot faster. It is so important, like I cannot emphasize, please hike. It is your job to keep the boat flat in all wind conditions. That's how you move faster. Especially in heavy wind, you will drag like there is no tomorrow. You essentially create your own current if you don't flatten the boat. That's the last thing you wanna do. You don't, and like I said, regattas, it's the fastest person around the race course. That is what it is. Medium wind, you still want that fist width. And heavy wind, you want it cinched. You want to see wrinkles on the foot. So you want to see wrinkles like this in heavy wind. You really want to flatten that as well. Vane and medium wind, it's really going to depend on the strength of your skipper as well. Dylan doesn't really like too much vane on in medium wind, but if I'm sailing with someone light like Katie, I might have to put on a little bit more to make sure we're still maintaining that same type of speed, because that's going to control how much the boom is inside the boat as well. For Zeg, I probably wouldn't put that much, but for Katie, I would need to put a little bit more. So weight, total combined weight matters. That's why I tell people, don't get offended when someone asks for your weight, because it's very important in sailing.
I once was at a regatta, and the class had a required weight of 210 pounds. No, it was 250. And they made us step on the scale at registration so that they knew that we were the correct weight. And one boat was, I think, half a pound over the minimum weight requirement. Everyone else was like 5-10 pounds over. One boat was half a pound because the forecast called for light wind for the weekend.
Bro, just go shit and then you're good. Then you're good. You get rid of that weight, you're good.
Yeah. So weight is everything in competitive racing, where they will actively bring out a scale if there is a weight requirement for the boat.
That's what they did for match race champs. Florida Tech, they were actually overweight, and they told, hey, you got to remove someone from your boat because it's unfair. If you have a heavier boat, they're going to get away in heavy wind compared to a team that has lighter people on the boat. So that's another reason why it matters. Heavy wind, everything's cinched. You want to create a wall so the wind just runs across yourself versus powering you up, so that you're not struggling to flatten the boat, or so that you're not drifting down the course or anything like that. You want to just create the tightest sail possible, and that's okay. That's another reason why we got new practice sails. They're designed for that as well. Weight placement, hike like there's no tomorrow. Like your core should be burning. And when you hike, and this goes for skippers, you got to be like a ballerina, legs together and point your toes. You want the hiking strap on your feet. You want them on your toes. Anywhere else, it's going to be painful, and you could actually rip muscles in your legs from not hiking correctly. It's super important. Legs together, hiking strap on your toes. You want to be as far out as the boat as possible. And adjust your hiking straps. We have square knots where you guys to adjust it. Everyone's different heights. I loosened mine so I can get farther outside the boat. Versus someone who's taller, they're going to probably put them a little bit lower so they won't slip out of the boat. Adjust them. Yeah, like if Jay is hiking as a crew, probably will put them a little bit lower so he's not like all the way out and then no longer is aerodynamic.
Because we had last time I was sailing with you, the hiking straps were super loose. I was really struggling to hike outside the boat because by the time they were catching on my foot, I was leaning down. My head was lower than my feet.
Yeah, so that's why it's important to adjust your hiking straps. Yep, and another good thing, which is I tell everyone in the water, butt cheek to butt cheek and shoulder to shoulder. You're gonna put your combined weight together, and it's gonna be a lot easier to hike because you have a combined force, downward force. Very important. In this crew, you're gonna slide back to your skipper, but skippers, the trunk and calf should be married. I cannot emphasize it. That calf should never leave that trunk unless you're tacking, so that the crew can slide back to you, and it's gonna be a lot easier to hike and everything like that. Yep, like I said, hike with your toes. If you guys are like straddling like this, you're gonna put so much strain on your hamstrings and calves that it's gonna like really start to tear them, and it's really bad for your legs. Like really, really bad for them. Another thing when you're hiking, I guess it's not on this one. Make sure you're not bananing. When I say that, you're not like this. Really bad for your lower back. And then when you do that, you move your center of gravity back in the boat so that at that point you're not actually doing anything. You're just torturing yourself. And another thing that the Florida Tech captain says is no pooping. What do we mean by that? You're not like this off the side of the boat. It just looks ridiculous. It literally looks like you're pooping. So you want to be plank. You want to be solid, planking. Not like this where you're like pooping off the side of the boat, and not bananing like this where you're hurting your lower back.
The only time you should look like you're pooping is if you're sailing a single-handed boat, and that's because then that's just sometimes the only way you can balance it properly.
So like in a roll kind of keep your back straight.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For skippers, I'm sure you know this, Andrew, as well. You feather and heavy wind. Why?
Keep the boat flatter and get a little bit better point out of it too.
Yes. So we also don't want to be overpowered, right? So another way to compensate for that is you head a little bit higher into the wind, so you're not filling your sails as much, and you can get a better point as well. So feather a little bit harder in flat water. You don't have to worry too much about chops. So you can get away with pointing a little bit higher. For crew, I didn't mention this in another one. It is so important to ease your sail in heavy wind if there's a big gust. One of the problems I would have with Brian is I would hold on to the jib so hard that we just end up capsizing because I'm not easing the sail. The jib is the gas pedal for the FJ. Every time there's a big gust, I would tell the exec, like, hey, I'm about to ease up, 3, 2, 1, I'm easing, so he knows what to do with the boat. Otherwise, we're gonna round up really hard, or he's not gonna figure out where the boat needs to go in that puff as well. As soon as we're hiking and we're flying, I'm saying trimming, so he knows where close haul is again. So crew, you gotta be very vocal. I'm like, I'm easing. If there's a massive puff, I'm like, hey, I gotta dump the sail to let them know I'm gonna jump back inside the boat, because when you dump the sail, let the jib sheet go, you're gonna probably rock to windward. So it's very important that you're communicating at all times. You're gonna think you sound annoying, but it's super important information for your skipper. If they don't know that, they're not gonna know what's gonna happen to the boat. They need to anticipate what the boat needs. Yeah, so if your tiller arm is getting tired, so like if Josh is like struggling to hold it like this, that means he's gonna tell his crew, hey, hike harder. I am struggling to keep this boat going straight. Very important. So if you think you're fighting the tiller, you gotta change something. Because I remember one time I was on Lively offshore. It was blowing like 20 knots. The boat's heeling over 45 degrees. I'm telling Brandon, I think we're gonna die or like capsize this keelboat. He's like, no. He holds the tiller like this, and the boat's going perfectly straight. You know why? Because our control lines were perfectly set. You should never have to fight the tiller in heavy wind. And there was only 2 of us on Lively. So that means if you set your control lines correctly and the weight placement is correct, that tiller, you should be able to hold it with 2 fingers like this. And he did this on a 32-foot long boat, so you guys can definitely do that on an FJ. So definitely hike hard in heavy wind.
When you jibe, I know like if you're like about to death roll, like it's like kind of a habit to try and like fight the boat back over, but what should like you do in that situation when you jibe, as far as how much should you like fight the tiller whenever you are jibing like that? Whenever you roll jibe?
Like roll jibing in heavy wind? Or just...
Kind of, just in general though also.
So like roll jibing, it really just comes down to weight placement.
Yeah.
You should really never be using too much tiller for any movement. Like the tiller is really just to initiate things. That's why I'm telling you guys to move it slowly. Otherwise the crew is the one that's actually forcing the boat to roll and actually change directions. Roll jibing, it's a lot of the crew moving themselves as long as the skipper. It's only really just initiating things. Like if you're trying to say a death roll, that's actually your weight placement that matters. Fuck the tiller. You need to move your body weight to make sure the boat's flat. You need to use the shape of the hull to flatten the boat out and to save it. One time I saved a death roll. My skipper was like 170 pounds and it was like 20 knots. But I flattened really hard and that's what actually saved the boat. He dropped the tiller, but we still had the boat moving forward. So it's all about the weight placement at that point. Yeah, this kind of just goes over everything. So if you have choppy wind, or if it's like a lot of chop, really wavy and stuff, you want to maintain a lot of contact with the surface. It's okay to move the tiller like this. I've done this before in waves. Up at the peaks, down in the troughs. So you should always be going in an S shape up the course like this. Literally S's. You gotta actually do a lot of S's. You're gonna think it's rule 42 because you're like moving the rudder like this, your tiller extension, but that's what you want. You wanna maintain a lot of contact with the water. Up in the peaks, down in the troughs. Up in the peak, down in the troughs. You're gonna use a lot of rudder, and that's perfectly okay. It's gonna feel weird, but that is correct.
And if you're easing the sail, you can ease and trim the sail to correspond with the waves, and kind of, you know, throw your body weight out a little bit. Because you're changing your course, it's not rule 42. If you're like trimming the sail and throwing your body weight but not moving your tiller, then someone's gonna call you for pumping your sail. But as long as you're changing the direction that you're sailing as you're going through the waves, then you shouldn't be called for rule 42.
Don't you get 1 pump per wave?
Yes.
Yes, and that's for downwind sailing.
Yeah.
I typically only use that for downwind sailing, so broad reach and heavy wind, if we ever need a broad reach, you pump as well. This goes for wing on wing too. I forgot who I told. If you're going wing on wing downwind and you're trying to catch a wave, I pull the boom off the shroud by an inch, and it actually powers up the boat to begin surfing. It's like I said, the skipper and crew both get 1 pump per wave. It's combined together. I pull the boom off the shroud, powers up the boat to move a little bit faster. And then once we're off the wave, I just let the boom rest on the shroud again. And you can just keep doing it. It's small moves. It shouldn't be like a foot, just like an inch. If you need a little bit more, depending on the conditions, that's perfectly okay.
The whole 1 pump per wave is the reason why people usually only think about it for downwind, is because upwind you're usually going against the waves, so you're really not going to have time for more than 1 pump. Downwind, depending on how fast the waves are traveling, you can basically just like slot right into the trough of a wave and just surf it the entire way down the course, where, you know, someone could, if you can do that really well, someone could just sit there pumping it over and over again, which is illegal. But it's a lot harder to do multiple pumps on the upwind.
Since I went over a lot of this, the only really important part that I'll go over from this section is crew. Crew and skipper, if you guys are constantly having to like ease the jib out going upwind a lot, that's probably a good indication of moving the jib car back. You want to flatten the jib sail so that the wind is moving across a lot faster, so you're not powering it up as much and not having to hike so hard. So if you're constantly having to like one time I was sailing with Mitch, I'm like, dude, I'm tired of like easing and trimming. He's like, we need to move the jib car back to make it a lot easier for ourselves. You don't want to overwork yourself, because you know it's 2 upwind legs. That's a lot of time and it's a lot of hiking. So if you're struggling to keep the boat flat, move the jib car back. If it's like 25 knots, move it all the way back. You want that thing flat as heck, just like your mainsail. You want it stretched and flat. Yep, rig tension, like Katie said, find someone who's heavier to really pull that forestay to really crank the mast forward as well. Broad reach, the only time you'll also do that is if you're driving to get to a specific gate. Otherwise, you're not really broad reaching unless it's like 30 knots. The most important thing for wing on wing, okay, that's fine. The most important thing for wing on wing and heavy wind is keeping the boat flat. That is the only time you don't want to be heeling. If you heel and you get like a weird shift that comes, you're probably gonna death roll. So make sure the boat is flat. I usually sit down. I think one time Brian and I were at JU. I literally sat in the boat and just kept the thing super flat because we were terrified of death rolling. It was super choppy, super breezy. If you feel comfortable, bring up some centerboard, and you gotta ease all the bang off. You guys understand why we have to ease the bang off? It sounds counterintuitive. No? Andrew? No?
Thank you.
almost. In heavy wind, you guys will only really see this in heavy wind. When we ease the vang off, yes, it does allow the main to be higher in the air, but we allow twists to happen. So what's gonna happen is, it's kind of hard to show this. This is gonna be twisted and the wind is gonna spill off the top half of the mainsail, dumping a lot of power off. Because if you have this closed like this, you're powering the boat up so much that you're not gonna be able to drive at all. It's like the wind is pushing so hard up against the mainsail and the shroud that there's no way, and no, it doesn't matter how much you turn up to let the boom jibe, it's just not gonna happen because the wind is stronger than you're able to pull that main sheet in. Ease the vang off to spill the power off the top half of the sail. At this point, we only want power in this lower half. That's all we need, right? Because we're too overpowered. We only want to control what we're able to handle, so that is only the bottom half of the sail. Ease the vang off to spill the power off the top half. Otherwise, you're gonna death roll if a shift comes and it's just gonna swing across and you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. Like I said, if you're comfortable, bring up some centerboard. I only bring up like a third of the way up. I'm just too terrified of dying, essentially.
Going slightly slower because you don't have the centerboard up is a lot faster than death rolling.
Yes. And then when you get to that mark rounding, I usually tell my skipper, I'm like, hey, can you start trimming in a bit so I can start putting something on? And then as we're doing the mark rounding, I crank on the vang as hard as I physically can because at that point I have to end up on a height. So try to get that vang back on when you're rounding the mark. That's when you have like the least amount of pressure on the sail to really crank it down. I usually just, sometimes I'll tell my skipper, hold the jib sheet for a second, I crank it all the way down. Very important that you get it in time before you go upwind. Otherwise, you're going to be hiking so hard that it's not going to matter. You're just going to keep heeling over. How do we turn this light off? So we're just going to go over like 2 pictures. I want you guys to tell me what you think should be corrected in this image. Any takers?
Did the skipper hold the jib a little lower, possibly?
Why?
Why?
Mm-hmm.
To get it like more open.
Yeah, so what Dylan should be doing is he's holding it pretty high up, right? Dylan's kind of holding the jib sail as if we're sailing at 5 knots. What he needs to do is pull it down harder down to kind of depower that jib as well and to create a new luff, but also keep the jib filled like you said. You want to keep it powered up as well. So yeah, he needs to pull the jib downwards. He's holding it as if we're in 5 knots. Anything else?
If you guys are like, it's kind of hard to see. I mean, it looks decently windy though. But if you guys felt that you're too overpowered, you would take more bang off. Is the top of the sail doesn't look too twisted, or is it twisted?
You can see some wrinkles,
Yeah.
so there is a little bit of twist. So you're right about that.
I can't tell from here. The outhaul could be tighter, but
Yeah, it depends. On the, like we said, I don't really remember what the wind condition is, but that, yeah, that is a good point to add on.
Going downwind, you're usually going to have your outhaul significantly looser than upwind. So even in super high wind conditions, you'll watch, top teams go around the windward mark and their sails just become really full because they let their outhauls out really far.
The reason why I let my outhaul kind of sit here, only because it was a brand new sail. This was, I think, the second time we had ever increased these sails. So I didn't want to create too much of a belly, and because I already had some twist up here. So if I depower my sail too much, I'm going to be slower as well. What do you guys think about this one? Too bad Katie isn't here. She just left it.
Jib is like in.
Yeah, so she's closing out the airflow. So what she should be doing is holding it out here. Her arm, for skippers, your arm should be out like this. Always out. And what she should have done is out and down to really make sure that the wind is moving across the sail. This should be almost like the new luff. And this should be like the new leech.
Also, we have nice long jib sheets on these sails. You can you cannot be so choked up on the sail. Let the sail like slowly slide out. This is one reason why sailing gloves are nice, because you can just let the line run through your hand. Let the sheet run out a little bit further. Let the wind fill the sail a little bit more, and that kind of gives you an idea of where the sail wants to be. Because when you're wing on wing, the sails are going to basically fill themselves. You're just stopping the jib from going forward.
What else? There's a major problem that I see.
Main on the shrouds.
You can see that it's like cutting through it, right? So that's really not good for the sail. You're also dumping a lot of power off. You want to maintain, usually our team as a whole does really good catching up to other boats downwind. So what Shane should have done is kind of bring it off the shroud a little bit so that we're still making a bubble. What he's doing, he's kind of slicing the sail in half. So what he's doing is now he's not even using this part of the sail. He's only using this portion, which is really slowing the boat down. You want to use this entire area. You see Katie has, this is really good. So when you are heeling, you're going to have to make slight adjustments. So this, no more than this angle, like 4 degrees off. This is roughly 4 to 5 degrees. Anything about this? It's okay to criticize me. I put it on here because there is an issue.
That looks really high.
Yeah, I think we were kind of catching a wave here. You can kind of see that we're cutting through. What I should have done is kind of get myself a little bit farther out the boat. We're broad reaching, so I need to be holding the sail a little bit further out. Because the problem with broad reaching is the main is already covering the jib, which is a problem. So I need to hold it out a little bit more to create better sail flow. Dylan's doing a really good job kind of leaning back, because in heavy wind, in your broad reaching, you can kind of get on a plane. You don't want to sink your bow into the water, otherwise water will come over the bow and slow you down. So what Dylan's doing, he's kind of leaning back to make sure the bow is at the right angle, right across the water. Otherwise, I should have done a better job holding it out. See how it's kind of closed out right here? I'm only using like 2/3 of the jib versus the entire jib.
I've seen crew.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. I've seen crew on broad reaches using the hiking straps to hike off of the bow to get the jib farther out.
Yeah, usually what I do is I kind of hook my back foot in and I'm holding off like this. This side of your body should be on the gunwale. You should almost kind of be laying down, holding it out. Yes, your arm's gonna hurt, but that's why we do arm workouts like we did today. So really hold it out there, because it's a lot of power that you're holding on to. What the hell is wrong with this photo? There's like almost like 10 things that are wrong.
Banana and the crew is not that good.
Yes. Kevin destroying his back. What else?
Some asymptotic plots right there.
This is booty, honestly. So you can see that it's not too windy, right? He has alcohol cinched, so obviously slow. You don't want to be seeing these wrinkles unless you're in heavy wind. I also have way too many wrinkles on my luff. So what should I use to fix that? What control line? Yes, downhole, pull this down to get rid of that. That's a little bit too much. Jib, whack. Sam, whack. Kevin, whack. None of this is good. This is why I put it on here. This is so bad. Do you think there's problems in this photo or no? This is such a sexy little tap.
Their main is trimmed in too far for them to be in flattening right now. You want your main slightly farther out as you're flattening. Once the boat is flat, that is when you trim it back to where you were before.
So if you have it too trimmed, it's gonna be more difficult to flatten the boat, and you're gonna waste time trying to flatten it versus actually moving forward. So usually when I roll tack, I will kind of ease the main sheet, probably no more than like 4 inches, Because what you're doing is when you're roll tacking, you want to create this small moment in time to not have too much pressure on the sails to allow you to climb to the other side. You're literally pausing time for yourself to get to the other side. So you ease it out a little bit, not too much, because you don't want to dump it and then slow down. Because if you dump too much, you're going to stop, and then you're not going to be able to roll attack because the boat's going to stall out. You ease it just enough so that you can climb to the other side as well. So yeah, it took them a lot longer to flatten, but this is good. I should be able to see this line. This is the like center line of the boat. Most of the rudder's out, which is sexy. Also see that here. Tanner, whack. Look at his, what is this? Oh my god. But yeah, this is a really good roll tack. And this is a problem I have too. When I roll tack, I oversheet the main, which is a big, or the jib sheet. When I do that, because it's a gas pedal, when we flatten the boat, we usually round up a little bit, and that causes us to stall the rudder out a little bit, and it slows us down. So that's why when you guys flatten, you're gonna pull at the same time, and that's when you should hear the ratchets click at the same time, and it's like an acceleration. You're gonna move a little bit faster. If the ratchets go at separate times, you're kind of making the boat torque in such a way where you slow it down. So don't over trim, just enough trim to flatten the boat, and then yoink in that last half, or that last bit, to really power up that last bit. So yeah, constantly communicate. Make sure you have enough rig tension so your boom isn't sitting low, otherwise you're gonna kill your skipper. That happened to me once. I got on the boat and we roll tack, and I thought I ducked enough, and I went bonk, and I literally went in the water. So make sure you have enough rig tension to make sure your skipper is safe. Crew, doesn't matter how much rig tension's on your boat, you're always gonna be, the boom is never gonna hit you unless you're too tall. That's why tall people skipper and shorter people crew, because you're more agile and you don't have to worry about getting hit in the head. FJs and 420s kind of have the same concept of heavy wind. Light wind's drastically different. So if you're ever going to regatta that requires C420 or Z420s, we usually give you a tuning guide so you can kind of get up to date on that. So you don't have to worry too much. In our conference, the only time we ever sell Z420s is if we're going to champs. That's the only instance that ever happens. Like I said, always better have your rig a little bit too tight because it's easy to take tension off rather than to add. One time, Mitchell and I switched places, and he put his foot on the boom and our mast, and he cranked it hard, and he's like, yeah, this didn't do anything. I was like, yeah, dude, like, it's too late. Like, we're on the water. Like, we don't have any force to help us crank the mast forward. So, easier to ease it off. If your control lines aren't helping you to adjust your speed, it's probably your rig tension. That's the last thing you change. Once you change your rig tension, that's it unless you get to land. So that's your last resort. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. Always use your control lines. I cannot emphasize that enough. If you don't touch them, it usually means you're not paying attention to what's around you, and that just tells me you don't want to go fast. Touch your control lines at least 4 times on the race course, at the bare minimum.
So college sailing, we rotate through boats.
Ooh,
Some schools are very nice and try and leave you with a fair boat. Other schools are very mean, and they will loosen your rig tension all the way, and try and mess with your control lines. And so before you launch, check your rig tension, check your control lines, make sure that it is appropriate for the wind conditions. And also remember that, we're sailing all day. In Florida, the winds are usually light in the morning and heavy in the afternoon. As we get later into the fall and then early spring, they usually even out to just be heavy. But if it's light in the morning and you're going out in the afternoon, and it's now heavy, you're probably going to need to tighten your rig tension. So keep an eye on it. I've seen people win races because they paid attention to their rig before they left.
And I will admit, there was I think it was a team I really, really fucking hated. And I loosened everything on that rig, and they didn't even fix it. Guess who was the slowest boat on the course? Them. So, you gotta still have good sportsmanship, but you can still sabotage someone if they themselves aren't paying attention. So, make sure you watch out. Look at your control lines. And Also, another thing I didn't mention, if your boat's like really, really slow, there's probably water in the tanks. You know what those are, right? That's the things you guys sit on. What Dylan and I did is we both sat on the transom, undid the drain plugs, and let all the water run out of the boat, and then we bailed it out. So if your rig tension control lines aren't doing anything, then there's probably water inside your boat, and that's when you can sit in the transom, take out the water, and then bail it out.
If it feels like the boat is rolling itself when you're doing roll tax, it also means that there's water in the tanks. Because you just have a bunch of extra weight that's moving around freely in the boat.
That's why you bail all the time. It makes a huge difference. What is it? Every gallon of water is like 8 pounds, something
Yeah.
like that. So
Every liter is a kilogram.
yeah, something like that.
So that's the easier conversion in my head.
So bail water at all times. What I did one time is I was bailing water as we were going wing on wing, and we passed someone on the downwind. It's not cheating. You're bailing your boat, so make sure you get rid of water. Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.